The hickory smoke should have made my mouth water, but all I tasted was ash. I sat with an empty plate while my daughter-in-law piled brisket high for strangers, smiling for her live stream. When I finally stepped forward, she slammed the heavy steel lid of the smoker shut right in my face. That crash did not just hide the ribs, it woke up the fighter I had buried 40 years ago. My name is Loretta May Collins, and I am 63 years old. I sat on a flimsy white plastic folding chair that dug into the back of my thighs, positioned way back near the fence line of my son's backyard in Riverbend, Colorado. The air was thick with the smell of hickory smoke and slow-roasted pork, that rich and fatty scent that coats the back of your throat. Around me, the yard was packed with neighbors I barely knew, my son's co-workers, and a few relatives who were too busy drinking to look my way. I heard the crisp snap and hiss of beer cans opening, followed by loud and performative laughter that seemed to echo in the hollow space of my empty stomach. On my lap sat a paper plate, pristine and white, without a single grease stain or crumb on it. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, was holding court by the massive and expensive smoker we had bought them last Christmas. She wore a pristine apron that said "Grill Queen" across the chest in glittery letters, and she held her phone up high with a ring light attached, pivoting her body to find the best angle. She was live streaming again. I heard her voice, pitched an octave higher than her normal speaking tone, talking to her followers about serving a meal for the people who truly appreciated her hard work and dedication. She smiled that tight and camera-ready smile, turning the tongs over in her hand like a scepter while the camera captured the glistening meat. I had tried to approach the table earlier, but Vanessa had stopped me with a loud and faux-concerned voice. She told everyone within earshot that the doctor said my blood pressure was too high and that she was just looking out for my health by keeping me away from the fatty brisket. It was a lie. My pressure was fine. But I watched as she heaped piles of glistening ribs onto the plate of a man who had moved in down the street just 3 days ago. He got the burnt ends, the best part, while I sat there swallowing my own saliva and trying to keep my dignity intact. Hunger has a way of making you desperate, even when you have your pride. I waited for a lull in the filming and stood up. My knees popped, but I walked steady toward the smoker. I held my plate out, just wanting a small end piece, something to stop the gnawing in my belly. Vanessa saw me coming, and her eyes narrowed instantly. Just as I reached for the serving fork, she grabbed the heavy steel handle of the smoker lid. She did not just close it. She slammed it down. The sound was like a gunshot, a heavy and metallic boom that vibrated in my chest. Smoke billowed out from the sides, choking me. She looked me dead in the eye and spoke loud enough for the microphone on her phone to pick it up perfectly. She said she did not grill for people who did not know their place. The chatter in the yard died instantly. For 1 second. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator through the open kitchen window. Then, someone laughed, a nervous and jagged sound. A voice from the back yelled out that it was just a joke, trying to break the tension. But I saw the phones. 3 or 4 of them were held up, the little red recording dots steady. They had caught it all. The old woman being denied a meal, the mother-in-law being put in her corner. I felt the heat rise up my neck, hotter than the fire in the pit. It was not just hunger anymore. It was the absolute humiliation of it. I had worked double shifts at a steel mill for 40 years. I had raised a family. Now, having lost my husband Hank and sold my home to live here, I was being treated like a stray dog, begging for scraps in a house I helped pay for. I turned to go back to my plastic chair, my face burning, when I saw something that made me pause. Standing near the sliding glass door was a man who looked entirely out of place. He was wearing a sharp grey suit despite the summer heat, and he was not eating. He was whispering to my son, Dylan, and Vanessa, who had momentarily stepped away from her grill. On his lapel was a badge that read, Silver Rock Residential Holdings. He was pointing a manicured finger at the second floor of the house, toward the window of the room I slept in. My stomach tightened, but the hunger was gone, replaced by a cold and sharp realization. That slam of the smoker lid was not just about petty spite. Today, they did not just refuse to feed me barbecue. They were preparing to roast my entire life over those coals, and they thought I was too old and too broken to notice the flames rising. The last car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the noise. I moved through the backyard like a ghost in my own life, carrying a trash bag that smelled of stale beer and wet cardboard. I picked up paper plates that were still sagging with half-eaten ribs and discarded cornbread. It made my stomach twist with a fresh wave of hunger to see how much good meat they had thrown away, simply because they were full. My own plate, which I had left on the grass near my folding chair, was the only one that was completely clean. It was clean because nothing had ever touched it. When the yard was finally clear, I went inside through the sliding glass door. The house was quiet, but the air still held the lingering scent of the feast I had been denied. I waited until I heard the heavy footsteps of my son and his wife moving upstairs. Then I crept to the refrigerator. I just wanted a slice of cheese, or maybe a cold leftover rib, anything to settle the shaking in my hands. I pulled open the door and saw the large plastic container right at eye level. It was packed tight with the brisket from the smoker. Taped to the lid was a bright yellow sticky note with Vanessa's looping handwriting on it. It read, "Do not touch. For guests tomorrow." She had drawn a little smiley face next to the words. I stared at that smiley face, and for a moment, I felt a heat rise in my chest that had nothing to do with the summer temperature. I looked down at my hands. They were wrinkled now, with spots of age across the knuckles, but they were strong hands. Back at Northline Steelworks, these hands had pointed out safety violations to men who were twice my size and half my age. I was the night shift manager for 15 years. I used to scream over the roar of blast furnaces and make grown men jump to attention. I had thrown drunk workers off the site without blinking. Yet here I was, a 63-year-old woman standing in the dark, afraid to eat a piece of meat in a house my money helped pay for. I had let them grind me down. I had traded my steel spine for a desire to keep the peace, and look where it had gotten me. I cursed the day I signed the papers for the old 2-story house in Oklahoma. I had believed Dylan when he sat at my kitchen table, holding my hand, telling me that I would never be lonely if I moved to Riverbend. He had said we would be a family. But I should have looked closer at Vanessa during Hank's funeral just 2 months before that. I remembered standing by the open grave, clutching a tissue, while Vanessa stood next to me. She squeezed out a few polite tears, but I saw her eyes wandering. She was not looking at the casket. She was looking at the house, scanning the roof and the porch, calculating how much the timber and land would fetch on the market. I remembered a phone conversation I had overheard in my kitchen while I was making coffee for the guests after the funeral. Vanessa had been on the phone with a friend, her voice low. She had said that once they sold my place, She and Dylan would finally be debt-free. When the friend asked about me, Vanessa had waved her hand in the air as if swatting a fly and said they would sort me out later. At the time, I told myself I was grieving and imagining things. Now I knew the truth. I was not a mother to her, and I was certainly not family. I was a movable asset attached to a signature that they needed to extract. I closed the refrigerator door without taking a thing. I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard. The massive smoker sat there like a black iron coffin, cold and silent under the porch light. I replayed the sound of that heavy lid slamming down in front of me. That slam was the end of my patience. If they wanted to treat me like a shadow in the corner, I decided right then that I would become the kind of shadow that terrified them. I would drag every secret they had into the light. As I turned to leave the kitchen, I saw a strip of light under the living room door. I peeked through the crack. Dylan was sitting at the coffee table, his head in his hands, while the man from Silver Rock tapped a pen on a stack of documents. Dylan picked up the pen and signed. He looked sick. Vanessa was standing by the window, swirling a glass of wine. She turned her head, and her eyes locked with mine through the glass of the French doors. Her expression did not change. She simply reached out and pulled the heavy velvet curtains shut, blocking me out completely. She thought she was closing the blinds on an old woman. She did not know she had just started a war. I closed my eyes and let the darkness of the room take me back to a time when I was not a burden in a stranger's house, but a force to be reckoned with. Before Riverbend, before the silence of widowhood, I was Loretta of Oklahoma. I was the girl with flame-red hair and hands that were permanently stained with motor oil from my father's auto repair shop. I grew up learning that the world did not give you anything unless you grabbed it with a wrench or hammered it into shape. I did not fear hard work. I feared being helpless, which is exactly what I had become. I met Hank when I was 22. He was a long-haul trucker with a gentle smile and calluses that matched my own. We did not have a honeymoon in Paris or a fancy reception. We had a promise. Hank told me that if we saved every penny, one day we would buy a house with a real backyard, the kind where he could smoke ribs every Sunday until the meat fell off the bone. It took us 20 years of scraping and saving to get that 2-story wooden house. By then, I was not just a mechanic's daughter anymore. I was a shift manager at Northline Steelworks. I ran the graveyard shift, overseeing 60 men who smelled like iron and sweat. When I told a man to step in line, he did not argue, because he knew Loretta Collins was fair, but she did not tolerate laziness. Then there was Dylan. He was our only child, our miracle. Because Hank and I had grown up scraping for every meal. We made the mistake so many parents make. We tried to give him a life without calluses. Dylan was smart, but he was soft. I shielded him from the harshness of the world, and in doing so, I left him defenseless against a woman like Vanessa. She breezed into our lives like a scented candle, all artificial warmth and packaging. She had a marketing degree and a way of looking at things not for what they were, but for what they could be sold for. At first, she called me Mom with a sweetness that almost fooled me. But soon, the comments started. She convinced Dylan to move to Riverbend for better career opportunities. She started making little jokes about how our house in Oklahoma was a money pit, saying that real estate was all about location and we were in the middle of nowhere. Then came the Tuesday that broke my world. Hank collapsed in the garage, right next to his beloved grill. It was a massive heart attack. I sat by his hospital bed for 6 hours, holding his rough hand as the monitors beeped. Before he slipped away, he pulled me close, his voice barely a rattle in his chest. He told me not to let them sell what we had sweated for. He told me to keep the house, because it was the only thing we really owned. But grief has a way of making you blind. At the funeral, while the dirt was still fresh on Hank's grave, Vanessa was already doing the math. She sat me down at the kitchen table, surrounded by casseroles from the neighbors. She talked about property taxes and hospital bills. She spoke about how hard it would be for me to maintain the place alone. She suggested a plan that sounded so logical through my fog of sorrow. She said I should sell the house, pay off the debts, and move into their guest room in Riverbend, just until we found me a nice little condo nearby. She slid a stack of papers across the table. I looked at Dylan, my son, the boy I had raised. He nodded, looking at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. I trusted him. I thought I was signing standard real estate documents and insurance forms. I did not know that buried in that stack was a durable financial power of attorney that gave Dylan full control over my assets. I signed away my life with a ballpoint pen, thinking I was securing my future. The day I left Oklahoma, I packed very little. The furniture went to charity, and the memories went into boxes. The only heavy thing I insisted on bringing was Hank's old, rusted charcoal grill. I remembered lifting it onto the moving truck, my back aching, whispering a quiet lie to myself to keep from crying. I told myself that where there is fire and meat, there is family. I thought that as long as we could cook together, we would be whole. Tonight, staring at the ceiling of my son's house, I realized how foolish I had been. That old grill was rotting in their shed, replaced by the shiny steel smoker that Vanessa had slammed in my face. There was no family here. There was only a transaction, and I was just a line item they were trying to erase. But they had forgotten one thing. The woman who ran the night shift at Northline Steelworks might have been dormant, but she was not dead, and she was done signing papers. I stayed in the shadows of the sliding glass door, listening as the party outside shifted from a celebration into something far more transactional. Vanessa was holding court near the patio heater, a glass of white wine in her hand, gesturing expansively as she spoke to a small group of guests. She was talking about a prime piece of lakeside property back in Oklahoma, describing the rustic charm and the acreage as if she and Dylan had bought it themselves as an investment. She spoke of tearing down the old garage to build a guest cottage, erasing the very spot where Hank had spent his final moments. It made my stomach turn to hear my life described as their portfolio asset. The man in the grey suit, Brandon Klein, chuckled and took a sip of his drink. He smoothed his tie and spoke in a voice that carried the oily confidence of a man who sold other people's memories for profit. He told the group that Silver Rock Residential Holdings specialized in exactly that kind of acquisition. He said it was a shame that previous owners rarely understood the true market value of what they sat on, implying that people like Hank and me were just squatters on a gold mine we were too simple to exploit. I was about to turn away when I heard Vanessa lower her voice, though not enough to hide the mockery. She leaned in toward Brandon and tapped her temple with a manicured fingernail. She told him not to worry about any legal pushback because I was becoming incredibly forgetful. She claimed that half the time. I still thought the deed was in my name. She let out a heavy, dramatic sigh and said it was exhausting dealing with my confusion. But they were doing their best to manage my decline. My hands clenched at my sides. I was not confused. I remembered every shift I worked to pay for that land. They were painting me as senile to validate stealing from me, a few feet away. My 19-year-old cousin, twice removed, Mariah, was giggling at her phone. She held the screen up to show a friend, and I caught a glimpse of the video. It was a loop of the smoker lid slamming down in front of my face. Below the video, bold white text read, POV, when your mother-in-law forgets her place. They were laughing at my humiliation, turning my pain into a 15-second joke for strangers on the internet. I needed to get away from their voices. So I slipped into the living room, pretending to head for the bathroom. The room was empty, but the coffee table was cluttered with the paperwork Dylan and Brandon had been reviewing earlier. My eyes landed on a single sheet that had slid out from a folder. It was a transaction summary titled, Sale of Collins Residential Property, Oklahoma. I leaned closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. At the bottom, next to the line for the seller, it did not have my signature. It said, Dylan Collins, power of attorney for Loretta Collins. The date was listed as yesterday, July 15th. My blood ran cold. I fumbled in my pocket for the cheap smartphone Hank had bought me years ago. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it, but I managed to open the camera app. I snapped a blurry photo of the document, then another one just to be safe. I had known they were pushing me around, but I had not realized they had already signed my home away using a power of attorney I thought was only for medical emergencies. Suddenly, the floor creaked behind me. I shoved the phone into my pocket just as Vanessa stepped into the room. Her smile was plastered on, but her eyes were hard as flint. She asked if I was lost in my own house, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Before I could answer, she stepped into my personal space, smelling of expensive perfume and white wine. She lowered her voice to a whisper that felt like a razor across my skin. She told me not to ruin tonight. She said I did not want to be transferred to a facility earlier than planned. Did I? The threat hung in the air between us. I realized then that this barbecue was never a party. It was a staging. I was a prop. A senile old woman safely housed with her loving children. Proof to Silver Rock that the property was free of encumbrances and moral baggage. They needed me to look weak so they could look legitimate. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the same cold focus I used to feel when a blast furnace malfunctioned at the mill. Panic was useless. Anger was a waste of energy. I needed a plan. I nodded slowly, playing the part of the cowed old woman, and shuffled toward the stairs. But inside, my mind was racing, cataloguing every detail, every name, and every date. They thought they were dealing with a helpless widow. They were about to find out that I was still the woman who could run a steel floor without blinking. The investigation had officially begun. The morning after the barbecue, Vanessa told me to get dressed because we were going on a little girls' trip. She called it a spa day for seniors, a place where I could relax and be pampered. We pulled up to a building called Serenity Pines Care Center. The name sounded peaceful, but the moment the automatic doors slid open, the smell hit me. It was not lavender or eucalyptus. It was the sharp, stinging scent of industrial bleach trying to cover up the odor of old urine and boiled cabbage. Vanessa marched ahead, her heels clicking on the linoleum, while Dylan trailed behind us, looking at his shoes. The facility was nothing like a spa. The hallways were narrow and scuffed, lined with fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped flies. We passed a common room where a dozen elderly people sat in wheelchairs, staring at a television that was turned off. I saw a woman who looked about my age sitting by a window, gazing out at a brick wall. She did not move. She did not blink. She just sat there, waiting for a visitor who I knew was never going to come. A cold shiver went down my spine. I realized that this was not a tour. It was a preview of my own expiration date. We stopped in a small, sterile room with 2 beds separated by a thin curtain. Dylan finally spoke up. His voice was thin and shaky. He told me that maybe this place would be good for me. He said they had professionals here who could take care of me better than he could. I looked at my son, really looked at him. I did not see the boy I had raised. I saw a man crushed by credit card debt and bad investments. A man so terrified of his wife that he was willing to discard his own mother to keep the peace. His eyes were full of exhaustion and evasion. He could not even look me in the face. The car ride home was a nightmare. I could not hold it back anymore. I leaned forward from the back seat and told Vanessa exactly what she was. I called her a gold digger who was stripping my family to the bone. Vanessa whipped around in her seat, her face twisted and ugly. She spat back that I was a useless old leech who had been eating into their savings for months. She said I should be grateful they did not just drop me off at the curb. Through it all, Dylan just drove. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles were white, but he said nothing. His silence cut deeper than any of Vanessa's insults. It was the sound of my son choosing his comfort over my dignity. When we got back to the house, I went straight upstairs to my room, needing to be alone. But when I opened the door, the room felt wrong. It felt empty. My eyes darted to the corner where I kept the stack of Hank's old mechanic manuals and the box of our anniversary cards. They were gone. The shelves were bare. I ran out to the landing and screamed down the stairs. Vanessa answered from the kitchen, her voice calm and indifferent. She said she had dropped them off at Goodwill while we were out because the room was too cluttered. My chest tightened like a vice. Those were not just books. They were the last pieces of Hank I had left. The world started to spin. My blood pressure spiked, pounding in my ears like a drum. I slid down the wall in the hallway, my legs giving out, until I was sitting on the hardwood floor. From downstairs, I heard the click of the gas igniter and then the whoosh of flames. The smell of barbecue sauce and char drifted up the stairs. It made me gag. It was the smell of my humiliation, haunting me in my own home. As I sat there, gasping for air, I heard Vanessa's voice drifting up from the kitchen. She was on the phone. She was speaking clearly, thinking I was safely tucked away in my room. She told the person on the other line that the contract with Silver Rock would be signed next week. She said the power of attorney was already handled. Then came the part that made my blood run cold. She said that if the old woman refused to sign, they would just have her declared mentally incapacitated. She assured them that they had it all under control. Panic set in. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed my small suitcase. I started throwing clothes in, my hands shaking so hard I could barely zip it. I was leaving. I had to leave. But then I stopped. Where would I go? My house in Oklahoma was sold, or in the process of being stolen. My bank accounts were joint accounts with Dylan, meant to make paying bills easier, which meant they could drain them or freeze them the moment I walked out the door. I had no car. I had no cash. I was trapped. I sank back onto the floor in the dark room, defeated. Outside, the sun had gone down, and the only light came from the backyard. The orange glow of the grill flickered against my window blinds, casting long, dancing shadows across the empty shelves. They were down there, cooking another meal, celebrating their victory over a woman they thought was already dead. I watched that flickering light, and something inside me hardened. It was the same resolve that had gotten me through double shifts and union strikes. If they wanted to use fire to burn my life down, I would use that same light to expose every ugly thing they had hidden in the dark. I was not going to a nursing home. I was going to war. The next morning, I was standing by the fence pretending to water a patch of dead hydrangeas when my neighbour spoke up. Denise Harper was a 55-year-old widow who spent most of her mornings on her back porch with a cup of black coffee, watching the neighbourhood with the sharp eyes of a hawk. She had been a nurse for 30 years, and she knew exactly what she was looking at. She waved me over to the fence line and told me that she had seen me sitting alone with an empty plate while my family feasted. She said she had seen a lot of things happen in this backyard that did not sit right with her. Denise pulled her smartphone out of her robe pocket and held it up for me to see. On the screen was the video of the barbecue. It was the moment Vanessa slammed the smoker lid down, playing on a loop. I watched my own humiliation replay, the sound of the metal clanging shut like a prison door. But then Denise pointed to the bottom of the screen. The video had thousands of views. She scrolled through the comments. They were not laughing at me. Strangers from all over the country were tearing Vanessa apart. They called her cruel. They called her a bully. For the first time since coming to Riverbend, I realized I was not invisible. I had an army. I just did not know how to lead them yet. Later that afternoon, Mariah knocked softly on the sliding glass door. My 19-year-old cousin looked pale. She admitted that she had posted the video thinking it was just funny family drama, a little joke for her friends. She did not expect the internet to react with such venom. She apologized, her voice shaking, and said she felt terrible for exposing me like that. I looked at her and saw an opportunity. I told her that she did not need to delete it. I told her that if she really wanted to help, she would help me tell the rest of the story. Denise did not just offer sympathy. She offered ammunition. She explained the laws in Colorado regarding the protection of at-risk adults. She told me about financial exploitation and how the state viewed coerced power of attorney documents. Then she made a phone call. An hour later, a young man named Trevor Malone sat at Denise's kitchen table with us. He was a lawyer who did pro bono work for the church, and he listened to me with an intensity that made me trust him immediately. I laid it all out for him. I told him about the power of attorney I signed, thinking it was for medical emergencies. I told him about the sale of the Oklahoma house that I had never authorized. I told him about the trip to Serenity Pines and the threat to declare me incompetent. Trevor did not look pitying. He looked angry. He said this was a textbook case of elder financial abuse. He told me that we had a strong case, but we needed to be smart. Trevor gave me my marching orders. He told me to play the part they had written for me. I had to be the confused, forgetful old woman. I had to let them think they had already won so they would get sloppy and say things out loud that they should have kept whispered. He told me to photograph every document I saw and to record every conversation where they discussed my assets. Mariah got to work too. She reposted the video, but this time she removed the snarky caption and replaced it with a simple question asking people what they thought of this treatment. It allowed the video to spread even further without looking like a calculated attack from me. Meanwhile, I began my own training. I sat in my room with my cheap phone and learned how to use the voice recorder app. I learned how to upload photos to a cloud account Trevor had set up for me. I treated that phone with the same respect I used to treat the heavy machinery at Northline Steelworks. It was a tool, and I was going to master it. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at me looked different than she had yesterday. The fear was gone from her eyes. The posture of the defeated widow had vanished. In her place, I saw the shift manager who had once thrown a 200-pound man off her site for harassing a female worker. I straightened my back. They thought they were dealing with a victim. They were about to find out they had picked a fight with the wrong foreman. By noon on Tuesday, the video Mariah had reposted had hit 2.5 million views. It was no longer just a local piece of gossip. It had been picked up by those drama channels on YouTube. The ones with guys in headphones breaking down frame by frame how my daughter-in-law had slammed a metal lid in my face. They were calling it the BBQ incident, and the internet was furious. I sat in my room scrolling through the comments, reading thousands of stories from other people. Strangers wrote about being excluded from family holidays, about being treated like furniture in homes they had paid for. I read a comment from a woman in Ohio who said she had eaten a cold sandwich in her car while her son's family ate Thanksgiving dinner inside. I felt a fire in my chest that was equal parts comfort and rage. I was not just fighting for my own dignity anymore. I was fighting for all of us who had been erased. Vanessa came home from work at 2 p.m, which was 3 hours early. Her face was blotchy, and her eyes were wild. A colleague had sent her the link, and apparently the comments section on her carefully curated cooking blog was being flooded with hate. She stormed into the kitchen where I was making tea and shoved her phone in my face. She screamed at me, demanding to know who I had talked to. She told me I was going to sit down right now and record a video saying it was all a big misunderstanding, a family joke that the internet took the wrong way. I looked at her, and I channeled every ounce of the confusion she had accused me of having for months. I blinked slowly and asked her what she meant. I told her I did not understand how the internet worked and asked if the Wi-Fi was broken again. I acted frail. I acted slow. It drove her mad. She slammed her hand on the counter and shrieked that I was ruining everything she had built. She was so loud, so consumed by her own narcissism, that she did not notice the back door was slightly ajar. Outside, hidden by the screen, Denise was standing there with her phone raised, recording every second of Vanessa's meltdown. While Vanessa was busy trying to bully me into a retraction, Trevor was dropping the hammer. He filed an emergency motion to freeze the proceeds from the sale of the Oklahoma house, citing probable cause of financial exploitation. The title company froze the transaction immediately. Silver Rock Residential Holdings got wind of the legal hold, and the reaction was instantaneous. I heard Dylan on the phone in the hallway, his voice trembling. Brandon Klein was threatening to pull out of the deal entirely. He told Dylan that Silver Rock bought properties, not scandals. And if this legal mess was not cleaned up in 48 hours, they were walking away. That would leave Dylan and Vanessa with the bridge loan they had taken out to cover their debts, a loan they could not pay without my house money. That evening, a van from the local news station pulled up to the curb. They had seen the TikTok and wanted to interview the mother-in-law. Vanessa tried to block the door, but I walked right out onto the porch. I agreed to speak to the reporter on one condition. I told her I would not share my son's last name because I did not want to destroy his life, only to address the behavior. It was a calculated move. It made me look like a protective mother, even while I was exposing their cruelty. The interview aired during the 6 o'clock news. I sat on my folding chair, looking small and grey. I spoke softly about how it felt to smell the smoke of a meal you were not allowed to eat. I described the silence of the backyard. I did not mention the stolen house or the forged power of attorney. I held those cards back. I wanted the public to focus on the cruelty first. When the segment aired, the station played the clip of Vanessa slamming the lid right next to my face as I spoke about feeling invisible. The contrast was brutal. The next morning, the story was on the front page of the local paper with the headline, "The High Cost of Disrespect." Trevor called me and told me to look out the window. There were news vans parked down the street. He told me that if they tried to touch me now, they would not just be fighting a lonely old widow. He said they would be fighting the entire city. I looked at the newspaper on the table, then at the terrified look on Vanessa's face as she peeked through the blinds. And I took a sip of my tea. The trap was set, and they had walked right into it. Trevor sat at my kitchen table 3 days later and slid a manila folder across the laminate surface. Inside was the copy of the sale contract for my home in Oklahoma and the power of attorney document that had authorized it. I picked up the contract and stared at the bottom of the page. The signature read, Loretta M. Collins. But the handwriting was wrong. It was round and looping, the kind of handwriting a teenage girl uses in her diary. My signature is sharp and jagged, a habit from signing quick safety manifests on a vibrating factory floor. I traced the ink with my finger. It was a forgery, and it was not even a good one. Trevor leaned in and pointed to the power of attorney. He explained that the document I thought I had signed after Hank died was a limited medical proxy, meant only for emergencies if I was in a coma. But this document in front of me was a general, durable power of attorney, granting Dylan full control over every cent I owned. Trevor said they likely swapped the pages in that thick stack of insurance forms while I was grieving. They had tricked me into signing away my freedom while my eyes were still swollen from crying over my husband. Denise, who was pouring coffee by the counter, suddenly snapped her fingers. She remembered seeing Vanessa leaving a strip mall office downtown called Clear Sky Legal Services about 6 months ago, carrying a thick envelope. Trevor nodded grimly. He knew the place. He said they were a shady operation known for rubber stamping questionable documents without asking to see the actual client. The betrayal went deeper than just the house. Trevor discovered that Hank had set up his life insurance policy with a specific clause. The payout was tied to me retaining residency in our marital home for as long as I was physically able. By selling the house using a fraudulent document, they were not just stealing the equity, they were voiding the insurance terms. They were committing insurance fraud. Later that night, I went to the garage to look through the few boxes I had managed to save. I opened Hank's old red toolbox and found a folded piece of notebook paper tucked under a wrench. It was a letter he had written a year before he died, but never mailed. In his shaky block letters, he wrote that he was worried about Dylan. He wrote that Vanessa only loved the successful version of our son, and he feared that the day he died, someone would try to carve up the meat while it was still hot. I held the paper to my chest and wept. Hank had seen it coming. He had tried to warn me from the grave. My cousin Mariah came running down the stairs a few minutes later, holding her phone. She had been digging through social media and found a private Instagram account that belonged to Vanessa. It was filled with photos of expensive handbags and trips she claimed she paid for with her bonus. The most recent story was a photo of the Silver Rock contract. The caption read that she was almost free of the old bag and the debt, followed by a champagne bottle emoji. My first instinct was to march upstairs and shove the phone in Vanessa's face. I wanted to scream, but I remembered the cool steel of the factory floor. I took a breath. I told Mariah to screenshot it and email it to Trevor. This was evidence of motive. If we went to court, this picture proved that their actions were malicious, not accidental. I was learning that silence was a weapon, and I was getting very good at wielding it. I did confront Dylan, though. I caught him alone in the laundry room. I asked him if he knew the signature was fake. He could not look at me. He mumbled that he knew the paperwork was a little irregular, but he told himself they were just bending the rules to help the family. He said he did not think of it as stealing. He thought he was just accessing money that would be his eventually anyway. It was a weak, pathetic excuse, but it told me everything. He was not the mastermind, but his cowardice made him an accomplice. Trevor called me the next morning. He said he had arranged a mandatory mediation session for the following week with Silver Rock, Dylan, and Vanessa. He told me that if they refused to back down, we would file a civil suit that would destroy them. He looked me in the eye and said that the choice was mine. He asked me how much I wanted to burn them. I looked at the calendar on the wall. I told him I was ready. I did not want to burn them. I just wanted to turn the heat up high enough so the whole world could see exactly who they were. Silver Rock called it a friendly mediation to clear up some unfortunate misunderstandings, but I knew a trap when I saw one. They asked to meet at Dylan's house, claiming it would be a more comfortable environment for someone of my age. When we arrived, the scene was almost comical in its cruelty. Vanessa had set up the backyard for another barbecue, but this time, there were no neighbors, no music, and no laughter. The yard was dead silent. The only sound was the hiss of the gas burners on that massive smoker, which was already hot and puffing smoke into the empty air. She was trying to recreate the scene of my humiliation, thinking it would make me feel small again. She did not realize that the heat does not scare a woman who spent 20 years working next to a blast furnace. I walked in with my team. Trevor looked sharp in his suit, carrying his briefcase like a weapon. Denise stood on my left, her face set in stone, and Mariah trailed behind us, her hands tucked into her oversized jacket where she had concealed a small camera. Trevor had his phone recording in his front pocket. We moved with the synchronized calm of a shift change at the mill. We sat down at the patio table across from Dylan, Vanessa, and Brandon Klein. Dylan tried to smile, but he looked like he was about to vomit. Vanessa was doing her best impression of a concerned daughter-in-law. She reached across the table to touch my hand, but I pulled it back before she could make contact. She told me that nobody wanted things to go this far. She said that if I just signed the papers, everything could go back to the way it was, and we could be a happy family again. Her voice was syrup poured over broken glass. Brandon Klein slid a document toward me. He called it a settlement agreement. He said that if I agreed to validate the power of attorney and allow the sale of the Oklahoma house to proceed, Silver Rock would offer me a relocation fee of $10,000. The agreement also included a clause stating that Dylan and Vanessa promised to care for me for the rest of my life. It was a bribe wrapped in a lie. They were trying to buy my house, which was worth $200,000, for pennies, and they expected me to trust the very people who had tried to starve me. I looked down at the paper, then up at Vanessa. I made my hands tremble slightly. I asked her quietly what would happen if I did not sign it. I asked what would happen if I wanted to keep my home. Vanessa sighed, dropping the act for just a second. She leaned in, her eyes cold and hard. She told me that if I did not sign, the doctors would have to get involved. She said they would testify that I was no longer lucid, and at that point, my signature would not be needed anyway because I would be a ward of the state. The silence that followed was absolute. Mariah shifted slightly, ensuring her camera caught the angle. Trevor placed his pen on the table with a deliberate click. He looked straight at Brandon and Vanessa and thanked them, saying that was exactly what he needed to hear. Then he opened his briefcase. He did not pull out a settlement. He pulled out the emergency freeze order on the bank accounts. He laid down the high-resolution photos of the forged signature next to my real one. He placed a printed screenshot of Vanessa's Instagram story, the one where she bragged about getting rid of the old bag and being debt-free. He laid them out like playing cards in a game they did not know they were losing. Brandon Klein went pale. He realized instantly that he was sitting in the middle of a criminal conspiracy. Dylan saw the look on the businessman's face and panicked. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the patio stones. He started stammering, pointing a shaking finger at his wife. He told me that it was all her idea. He said she was the one who told him to sign the papers. He looked at me with wet, desperate eyes and said he only did it because she told him it was the only way to fix their money problems. I watched them crumble. The perfect couple was tearing each other apart right in front of me. Vanessa was screaming at Dylan to shut up, her face twisted in ugly rage. Dylan was crying, looking like a frightened child. It was pathetic. I felt a wave of exhaustion, but not weakness. I stood up. I did not scream. I did not argue. I waited until they stopped yelling to look at me. I told them that I had not come there to sign anything. I told them I came to get one last look at the people who chose paper money over their own blood. I turned away from the table and walked over to the smoker. The heat was radiating off the steel lid. I reached out and turned the gas knobs to the off position. The hiss of the fire died out instantly. Then, I lifted the heavy lid. I looked at the grate, then gently lowered it back down. There was no slam this time, just a soft, final click of metal on metal. I had turned off their fire. Now, I was leaving them in the cold to face the storm I had brought with me. The Riverbend County Courthouse was packed tight. It was not just reporters with their cameras and microphones. The pews were filled with people who looked like me. There were rows of grey hair and walkers, elderly men and women who had been pushed to the margins by their own families. They had come to see if the law still protected people who were considered past their expiration date. The prosecution did not need to be theatrical because the facts were ugly enough on their own. They laid out the timeline of the forged power of attorney. They showed the emails between Vanessa and Silver Rock, discussing how to move me into the cheapest room at Serenity Pines so they could secure the sale of the Oklahoma house. The defense lawyer tried to paint me as a confused old woman. He brought up times I had misplaced my reading glasses or forgotten a date. But Trevor destroyed that narrative. He produced my notebooks, the ones I had kept since my days at the steel mill. I had logged every medication, every conversation, and every suspicious transaction with the precision of a shift manager. I was not senile. I was just inconvenient. Then they played the video on the large screen above the jury box. The courtroom went dead silent as the footage from the barbecue rolled. Vanessa smiled at the camera, serving brisket to strangers. Then came the moment I stepped forward. The sound of the smoker lid slamming down echoed through the room like a gunshot. In the silence of the court, stripped of the party noise, it did not look like a joke. It looked like violence. I saw the jurors flinch. I saw people in the gallery look down at their hands. When I took the stand, I did not cry. I kept my voice steady. I told them about the heat of the factory floor and the 20 years Hank and I spent paying for that house. I read Hank's letter aloud. The part where he warned me not to let them sell our sweat for cheap. Every word was a slow, deliberate cut. Silver Rock saw the writing on the wall, before the verdict could even be read. They agreed to void the contract and issue a public apology to avoid further bad press. They ran from the scandal as fast as they could. The judge was not as lenient with my family. He declared the power of attorney invalid and the house sale void. He ordered Dylan and Vanessa to pay back every cent they had spent from my accounts. He sentenced them to 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service, specifically at a senior care facility. They would have to clean bedpans and serve meals to the very people they had tried to discard. Dylan broke down, sobbing. He looked at me, his face wet with tears, and whispered that he was sorry. Vanessa stood frozen. Her hands shook as she checked her phone under the table. Her sponsors were dropping her. Her carefully curated brand of the perfect family was dead. She looked at me, expecting anger, but I just felt cold. I looked at them both and spoke clearly into the microphone. I told them I did not ask the court for mercy. I told them that the day they slammed that lid in my face, they did not just refuse me a piece of meat. They refused their right to call themselves my children. I said the legal verdict was just paper. But the verdict in my heart had been passed the moment that metal hit the grill. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. Denise and Mariah were waiting for me. A reporter thrust a microphone in my face and asked if I could ever forgive them. I stopped and looked him in the eye. I told him that forgiveness is a meal you eat when you are full. I said that today. I had only just won back my seat at the table. As for them, I said I would let the law and their own consciences grill them for as long as necessary. Across the street, a hardware store had a display of summer grills on the sidewalk. I walked over to a large black smoker, very much like the one in Dylan's yard. I reached out and touched the cold metal of the lid. I did not flinch. I tapped it twice, a solid rhythm, then turned my back on it and walked down the street, my head held high. The fire was out, but I had never been warmer. Thanks for listening to my story, folks. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop your city or state in the comments below and tell me what you would have done in my shoes. If you believe in standing up for yourself, no matter your age, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help get this story out to more people who need to hear it.